Listen, that screech is the sound of an $8 billion company connecting the world to the internet right before it handed away the one thing that could have saved it: two machines, improvising a language over a phone line that was only ever built to carry a human voice, a conversation you were never meant to hear, ending in the hiss of an open line. And for most of a decade, that hiss was the sound of the whole world arriving online. The dial-up modem king was called US Robotics. It built the on-ramp everyone used to reach the future, and then it watched a faster road open alongside it and drive straight past. It started in 1976 in Chicago, in a 400-square-foot windowless room on Lincoln Avenue, above an Army surplus shop and next door to a dance studio. 5 friends from the University of Chicago pooled about $200 between them. Casey Cowell, who was 23 and would run the company for the next 2 decades, ran the business. Paul Collard designed the hardware, Steve Muka, Tom Rawson, and a man named Stan Metcalf filled out the rest. They wanted a name that sounded like tomorrow, so they borrowed one from Isaac Asimov, from the fictional firm in I, Robot, US Robot, and Mechanical Men. They dropped the Mechanical Men and kept US Robotics. And here is the first strange thing about them. The company never built a single robot. It just wanted to sound like the future before it had decided what the future would be. What it actually made was a way to push data down a telephone wire. The first product was an acoustic coupler, a rubber cradle you jammed a phone handset into, running at about 300 baud, and first-year sales came to roughly $50,000. The modem itself was a Bell Labs invention from around 1958. What US Robotics chased was speed and the ordinary consumer. In 1979, after regulators finally loosened AT&T's grip on what you were allowed to attach to a phone line, US Robotics shipped its first true modem. In 1984, it moved manufacturing to Skokie, Illinois, the suburb that would be its address for the rest of the story. The climb began underground with the hobbyists. In 1986, US Robotics launched a high-speed line it called HST, 9600 bits per second, then 14400 by 1989, then 16800 by 1992. And instead of chasing corporate buyers, it sold discounted courier modems to the people running bulletin board systems out of their spare rooms. Those sysops were the entire online world before the internet had a front door, and they became evangelists. The courier was the first modem to offer V32 bis at 14400 bits per second, and when a faster standard came, you upgraded the box in the field instead of throwing it out. Loyalty compounded, one power user at a time. In 1991, the company went public, sold 2,380,000 shares, and raised $28.3 million on revenue of about $79 million. Then, in 1993, it aimed at everyone. The Sportster was the modem for ordinary people, cheaper, faster, in a plain box, and it took over the retail shelves for 14.4K modems. The beige computers of the mid-1990s were very likely carried onto the internet by a box made in Skokie. The numbers tell the rest. Revenue was $889 million in fiscal 1995, and for the year ending September 1996, it hit $198 billion. Revenue up 122%, and earnings up 158% in a single year. More than 1 in 4 modems sold in North America carried its name, and close to 40% of the ones you could pull off a store shelf. US Robotics was the modem king, and its logo was the last thing a generation saw before that screech let them in. And in the middle of all that, in 1995, it quietly bought something that had nothing to do with modems. A tiny outfit called Palm Computing was almost out of cash. Its founder, Jeff Hawkins, had spent the previous stretch doing one of the strangest things in the history of product design. He had whittled a block of wood, about 4.7 by 3.2 inches, cut a stylus from a chopstick, and carried the block in his shirt pocket for weeks, pulling it out in meetings to check his calendar on a piece of dead wood, learning how a real handheld would sit in a hand in a pocket before a single circuit existed. That block would eventually end up in the Computer History Museum. In 1995, it was just a curiosity in an inventor's hand. A US robotics executive named John Zakin watched a demo and bought the whole company for about $44 million in stock. Remember that block of wood. It is the most valuable thing U.S. robotics will ever touch, and almost no one inside the building will notice it walk in. In the spring of 1996, Palm shipped the Pilot 1000 and 5000 at $299 and $369. It sold more than 1 million units in about 18 months, more than 5 million by 1999. And after a trademark fight, it took the name people still remember, the Palm Pilot. The modem king had stumbled into the next era of personal computing, and it was sure it had bought a hobby. But the core business had a war to fight first, over the next jump in speed, 56K, and here is a fact U.S. robotics never printed on the box. It did not invent 56K either. The trick that coaxed 56 kilobits out of an ordinary phone line was patented by an independent researcher named Brent Townshend, who licensed it out and, after some litigation, collected royalties that peaked around $2.50 a modem. U.S. Robotics built its own version of the idea and called it X2. A consortium led by Rockwell built a rival, incompatible version called K56 Flex. The two would not speak to each other, and that broke the market. Internet providers refused to wire their modem banks for a standard that might lose. Consumers refused to buy a box that might bet wrong. The whole upgrade cycle froze at the exact moment U.S. robotics needed it to run. It ended in a truce, not a rout. In early 1998, the International Standards Body brokered a single standard called V90 that folded both camps together, and the war was settled by a free firmware flash. You updated your modem, and the fight was simply over. And the number on the box had always been a small fiction. Rules under FCC Part 68 capped the real download speed near 53 kilobits, and your upload never beat 33.6. 56K was a speed the phone line could not actually hold. By then, U.S. robotics had already made the bet that would define its ending. In February 1997, it agreed to merge with 3Com. 3Com was a Silicon Valley networking company, founded in 1979 by Bob Metcalfe, co-inventor of Ethernet. By pure coincidence, U.S. robotics had a co-founder named Stan Metcalfe too. No relation, just two names sitting in the middle of the largest deal either company would ever sign. By 1997, Bob Metcalfe was long gone from management, and 3Com was run by Eric Benamou. On February 26, 1997, the two announced an all-stock merger at an exchange ratio of 1.75 to 1, worth about $6.6 billion, the largest merger in the history of data networking. The logic was to surround and conquer. 3Com made the network cards and the hubs, U.S. robotics made the modems, and together they would own the entire path from your bedroom to the internet, and finally outflank Cisco, which controlled something like 80% of the gear that routed the internet itself. The king was being crowned and sold in the same breath, and within days, the trap sprang. That same month, Intel cut the price of network interface cards by about 40%, and 3Com had to match it. In 2 days, roughly $2 billion of 3Com's market value evaporated, the commodity floor dropping out of exactly the kind of hardware the merger had just doubled down on. Gear now sold by the pound, triumph and warning stacked in one frame. The deal closed anyway, on June 12, 1997, and because it was all stock, the rising share price meant it was worth closer to $8.5 billion by the time the ink dried. U.S. robotics, the $200 room on Lincoln Avenue, now accounted for about $2.5 billion of a combined $5.6 billion in sales, nearly half of the whole. The giant did not work. For fiscal 1998, 3Com's net income collapsed from $500.5 million to $30.2 million, dragged down by a $253.7 million charge tied to the merger itself. Fortune ran the autopsy before the deal was even a year old. Unsold modems stacked up in warehouses. Money owed by customers stretched past 100 days. And two cultures, button-down Skokie and freewheeling Santa Clara, never fused across the 2,000 miles between them. They mostly resented each other. Meanwhile, the one team that might have carried them somewhere genuinely new got tired of asking. Jeff Hawkins, the CEO he had recruited, Donna Dubinsky, and their partner, Ed Colligan, wanted 3Com to set Palm free as its own company. 3Com refused. So in 1998, all three walked out and founded a rival called Handspring. The modem company had inherited the future, held it for 3 years, and then let it resign. It still thought of itself, all the way down, as a maker of modems. The block of wood was already gone. Then came the day the market said out loud what the company could not admit to itself. On the 1st and 2nd of March 2000, at the screaming top of the dot-com mania, 3Com carved off a thin slice of palm and floated it. The shares were priced at $38. They opened near 145, spiked as high as 165, and closed around 95. By the end of that first day, Palm, the side project, the accident, the thing bought for $44 million, was worth about $53 billion. Its parent, 3Com, which still owned roughly 95% of Palm, was worth about $28 billion. Those two numbers refused to add up. The piece was worth nearly double the whole. By the market's own arithmetic, everything about 3Com that was not Palm, the modems, the network gear, the brand, the factories, the merger of the decade, was being valued at less than nothing. Economists still teach it as the negative stub. The day a company's crown jewel was publicly worth more than the entire crown, and everything else was priced below zero. And the founders who cut that jewel were not even in the room. They had been gone for 2 years. 3Com finished spinning Palm off to its shareholders by July 2000, and that same summer it spun the modem business back out too, as a small, independent US robotics again, letting go of both its future and its past, on the way to becoming neither. Because while the company spent 3 years fighting over a standard, merging, unmerging, and watching its own child outgrow it, a faster road had been quietly paved right beside the one it built. That road was broadband. Cable and DSL didn't make a better modem. They made the modem beside the point. Broadband was simply on. No dialing, no screech, no busy signal. By 2005, for the first time, more American homes reached the internet over broadband than by dialing in. Broadband had climbed to 51% of home internet users, up from 38% just a year earlier. The internet US robotics had connected the world to was exploding. The one method it sold, placing a phone call to reach the internet, was dying. They had built the on-ramp a whole generation merged onto, and the future had laid a highway that needed no ramp at all. What was left was a long hunt for a buyer. In 2003, 3Com sold part of its carrier business to UT Starcom for about $100 million and formed a joint venture with a fast-rising Chinese company, Huawei, that owned 51% of it. By then, the surviving US robotics was a shadow of itself, doing around $144 million a year. In 2007, the private equity firm Bain Capital and Huawei together offered to buy all of 3Com for $2.2 billion. But 3Com owned a security division called Tipping Point, whose intrusion gear was sold to the US government, and Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei, was a former officer in China's People's Liberation Army. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States began circling the deal. It never reached a presidential veto. Under the pressure, in February 2008, the buyers simply walked away, which left the fire sale. In November 2009, Hewlett-Packard agreed to buy 3Com, and the deal closed on April 12, 2010, at $7.90 a share, about $2.7 billion net, a little over $3 billion gross. Set that against the roughly $8.5 billion the US robotics merger had been worth in 1997, and the whole thing, both companies together, sold for about a third of what one of them had once paid for the other. Weeks later, and entirely separately, HP bought Palm as well, for about $1.2 billion, and then let the brand die in its hands. The modem name itself survived, sold again in 2013 to a firm called Unicom Global, where US robotics limps on as a niche label in a market that long ago stopped needing modems. That screech. Those two machines working out a shared tongue across a wire built for a voice. The hiss of the open line that meant you were finally through. A whole generation shared it. It was the sound of arriving somewhere, and US robotics made the machine that made it. An on-ramp does not get a monument. When the highway opens, no one remembers the little road they used to merge from. Then broadband arrived carrying no sound at all, and the screech just stopped. No goodbye, No last transmission, only silence where the handshake used to be. The company that connected the world to the internet was erased by the internet's next breath. It spent everything defending the on-ramp and never understood that its real future had walked in the door in 1995, carried in a shirt pocket shaped like a block of wood, and that it had let that future walk right back out. If you want more stories like this one, the giants that had the future in their hands and let it go,